This is the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Glory to you, O Lord. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. They were asking, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all of Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when this star had appeared. And then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out. And there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then, opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
You may be seated. I like to think of myself as a bit of a storyteller. It's something I love to do. I love telling stories. I also love hearing stories from others. I often tune my radio to NPR and listen to some of their programs of just people telling the stories of their lives, stories of things that happen around them. I think there's something so fascinating about that, about hearing someone tell a story, about being connected like that. And fortunately for me, I found myself a career where I can tell stories on at least a semi-regular basis, and people don't seem to get too upset about it. I'd imagine if I became an accountant, there would be a little less tolerance for me telling stories every couple of weeks for 20 minutes or so. But here, the people seem okay, so this is good. It's a good place for me. I can tell a few stories. It all works out. Lately, though, in the last maybe year or so, I found myself telling most of my stories, not here in church, not in the office, but at home. I've got a 3-year-old son, and he loves stories. He can't seem to get enough of them. He'll pick out books and books and books to read, especially at night. I think some of that's delaying a bedtime tactic, but he does seem to enjoy the books when we read them, and we'll tell all of these different stories. And I just love watching him kind of dive into what's going on in the book, in this story, in the imagination that's kind of churning around in his mind. What I especially like doing, and I get to do it every so often, is I'll take one of his stories and I'll change some of the names of the characters. I'll make my son maybe the main character in the story, maybe the hero. And as I start putting in names of people he knows into the story, I can watch his face kind of light up and change in a different way. I can see kind of the gears in his head turning, and somehow the story now is maybe a little more real for him. There's something special going on when the story isn't just abstract and off in another world, but it might be something that you or somebody you know could even be a part of. And I don't think that's necessarily limited to just 3-year-olds imagining themselves as the hero of whatever fairy tale book they're reading. But I think each of us, at least to some level, we like to put ourselves in the stories we hear. That's what I think makes a good story, a story that you can relate to, that you can feel like you're a part of. When you hear a really great story, you feel like you're there right beside the protagonist, right battling whatever you have to battle, going through whatever difficulties you're going through. In a really great story, we get nervous when our protagonist is in danger. We're happy and excited when they conquer something. We're sad when they have a loss or they lose someone close to them. The best stories are the ones that we feel like we're a part of and working through right alongside those characters. And I think at least part of the job of a preacher is to take these stories that we get from the Bible, these stories of the Old Testament and the prophets and creation, and of the New Testament and Jesus, and of Paul and all of the things that happen after Jesus is gone. We have to take those stories and try and find a way to put ourselves, to put each of us somewhere in that story, to feel like it's a part of us, that it's happening right now. And that's not always very easy to do. Some of these stories seem kind of strange. You see, they were written a really, really long time ago. And they were written in a part of the world that's pretty far away from here. Not many of us have the experience of that Middle Eastern culture, or a culture that existed only 2,000 years ago. It can be hard to put ourselves in the place of a lot of these characters because the things they do don't always make sense. We don't always have the same context or the same understanding of what it means to be a person in that time and place. But today, this story of the wise men, or maybe a translation I like a little better, of the Magi, is different. You see, the Magi, they don't come from that first century Palestine area. They're not a part of that same culture that Jesus and Mary and Joseph and the prophets and everyone else was a part of. They come from somewhere else, from a land far away, and they dress kind of funny. They probably talk with a bit of an accent compared to everybody that they're meeting. They don't understand all of the cultural norms or all of the intricacies of what it means to be a person there in Palestine or in Bethlehem or in Jerusalem. And yet they're a part of the story all the same. I have to imagine that if any of us were to find ourselves somehow miraculously transported right into the Bible stories, right into first century Palestine, they would probably call us a Magi. Somebody who dresses kind of funny from some far off place. In fact, the word Magi is where we get our word magic. And it would be pretty easy to see how a lot of the things that we have, or even those wise men had, would seem like magic to the people there in first century Palestine. So I want for just a moment, if you could imagine with me. Imagine that you're a part of this story, a part of the story of the wise men or the Magi, that you are one of those that was called by that light in the sky. Imagine that as you're going about your day-to-day life, as you're heading to work one day, you notice, you feel, you see something up in the sky, some light that is calling to you. And you just can't ignore it. It pulls at you night after night. And you know that you have to do something about this. You can't let it go. And so you talk to your family and your friends, and you find out that at least a couple of them have seen this light too. And for some reason, they feel like they have to follow it. They have to see where it leads. They have to see what God might be doing, where God might be calling each of us. And so one night early in the evening, you set off. And you follow this star, this light in the sky, this thing that has been calling you across this desert. And you find yourself in a little country that nobody paid much attention to, around a lot of shepherds, around a lot of fields. You go in through the government office to announce your arrival, and they kind of push you all the way through. They say, no problem, come right in. You could say that's wise men privilege, I guess. They get you right in where you need to be. And then you notice the light sending you to a tiny little backwoods town. You enter the town and you find a tiny little house, and somehow you know that this is the place you've been called to. And you knock on that door and you find inside that house at the same time, the most ordinary and the most extraordinary scene you've ever seen. A mother with a little baby, with a child. And they look incredibly ordinary. They're not from any royal family. They're not doing anything out of the ordinary. They're just there. And yet this scene, a mother and her child, is what that light has called you to. It's what God has called you to come and to see. You're not entirely sure what to do, but you unpack the gifts that you brought, these gifts that you've collected and earned and made throughout your life in a faraway place, and you place them at the feet of this child. After a few moments, you pack up and you begin to head back home, and you can't help but feel like something has changed. That somehow, some way, this child, this little scene, this most ordinary thing in a backwoods town and an out-of-the-way country, somehow that child is changing the world. Somehow that child means something brand new, not just for the people who lived in that culture, but for you and for everyone you've known and for the entire world. And as you head home, you can't help but wonder what God might do next. That's the story of the wise men, of the Magi. And what I love about that story is, yes, it took place 2,000 years ago, some 6,200 miles away from here. But I think that story has taken place again and again and again, and countless times, in countless places, with countless people, with countless magi being called in countless different directions. Because God, 2,000 years ago, did something brand new. And every day since then, God has been doing something new. Something new in the world around us. We call this day in our church here the day that the Magi found Jesus. We call it Epiphany. This time when the Magi and the people around saw Jesus as this new king, as this person who would change the world. And I think every day since then has been its own epiphany. In some time and in some place, someone has woken up and felt called by a force they can't explain or understand. Called to travel, called to go to a country or to a people that they would never visit otherwise. And when they arrive there, they see God at work. God at work in people and places they never expected. That's what God is doing in this story. That's what God has done every day since then. Maybe you've even felt it once or twice in your own life. Maybe you've felt some kind of calling, some kind of urging, something that didn't make a whole lot of sense that you couldn't quite explain. And yet you felt called to go to a people or to a place that you might not ever visit otherwise. To go and to see in the people around you, in the relationships around you. To go and see in the person or place you never expected. And when you arrive there, you find nothing less than Jesus looking back at you. Those moments, however short they may be, wherever they may be for each of us, those moments change our lives. And it's all we can do in those moments but to take our gifts, those things God has given us, those things we can do or that we have, and to lay them at the feet of Jesus. That's what this story is about. That's what this story is telling us, that no matter where we are, no matter how distant we feel from the story of the Bible, that we are still a part of what God is doing today. Maybe some of you are feeling called, and I hope that as you go out today and as you go out this week, at some point you look up, you look out, you see or hear or feel God calling you to do something new, to go out and to care for somebody, to go out and to see the face of God in someone looking back at you. It's not easy to do. It doesn't always make a lot of sense. Those callings can be tricky to figure out exactly where or what direction we should be headed. But every once in a while, that light stops over a person or a place that we never expected. We get a glimpse of God looking back at us, a glimpse of what God is doing right here and right now, a glimpse of a new epiphany in our lives today. Amen.